builder. Done. Roll that intro. What's up, everybody? You're watching Too Long Didn't Read Filmmaker, where the answers comes first, the reasons come last, but we are constantly and always still learning. So today I'm going to teach you how to balance your 3-axis gimbals in the fastest, most efficient way that I know how. Now, there are a lot of different approaches and a lot of different ways that you can get to the same result. So if you've seen other filmmakers do an approach that makes a lot more sense to you and you're like, yes, this makes the most sense to me, by all means, do it that way. I'm not saying that my way is the one and only way. I'm just saying, to me, it seems like the fastest way because you do go through a very specific order and basically you don't have to do as many micro adjustments with it. So today I'm going to teach you how to balance a single-handed 3-axis gimbal, specifically the Mozua Air, and then I'm going to teach you how to do a smartphone gimbal, the Mozua Mini Me. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so before you start balancing your gimbal, you want to make sure you assemble everything. So make sure you have batteries in the handle grip here, as well as your tabletop tripod legs are attached so that you can place it on a flat surface and begin your balancing act. Now, obviously, as you find out which lenses you like to use and which camera body you're using, you can obviously preset everything so you don't have to balance everything from scratch. But for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm obviously going to balance it from scratch. Now, this setup I currently have is what I call the traveling setup. So basically everything is as compact as possible. So when I'm using it in my Pelican case, it's not going to take up a whole lot of space. Okay, so before you even get started, first, you kind of want to decide, depending on what setup you have, you kind of want to figure out how long you want your quick release plate. So in this example, I have a GH4, which is not very heavy on the body side, and then I have a Viltrox speed booster, followed by the Rokinon 16mm f2. Now, in terms of micro four thirds, this is quite a long setup for the camera. Usually a micro four thirds lens is quite small. So basically, I need a longer quick release plate to have more balance. If you have a very small pancake lens, then you don't need a quick release plate this long. So basically, attach your quick release plate, take off your lens cap. If you're going to be shooting outside, make sure you have a variable ND filter already attached. Make sure you have your battery inside. Make sure you have an SD card inside. And then, because of the GH5 and GH4, we have a swing out monitor. And for me, I always have the monitor swung out so I can see what it is that I'm filming and framing, and I can also tilt the monitor up and down. So basically, long story short, you're trying to make sure that the camera is in the exact configuration you need it to be so that you can basically balance it for that purpose. So let's start off by getting the camera onto the gimbal, and then we can find out where to start from there. Okay. Now, there are many, many different theories and ways that people prefer to balance their gimbals, and as long as it balances and works, that's fine. The way I'm doing it is not, it's just another way of doing it. So don't get too heated if I do something that's different, because the end result generally is still the same. Okay, so the first thing we do now that we have the camera attached to the gimbal is we want to see where is the first major motion. So if this is where our end goal needs to be, as soon as I let go, you'll notice that it's rotated this way. That's being handled by this motor back here, and that's generally the first adjustment you're probably going to be doing. So because it fell this way, we need to counter it. So I'm going to loosen this screw and start moving my camera in the opposite direction. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect by any means. Right now, you're just trying to get the gimbal to be in a workable fashion, okay? So the next thing I do is I want to figure out what is this tilt doing. So it's handled by this motor here. It's off to the side. So what I do is I hold on to the bar that's over here, and I'm going to then flip and tilt my lens straight up, and when I let go, you'll notice that it's coming towards me, okay? So what we want to do now is we want to loosen this screw, and while holding onto this bar area, we're just going to slowly, all right, that might be it, but it's not a whole lot of adjustments in terms of this motor, but we basically just want to do a really small adjustment so that it doesn't do that. Now, if we, while still holding on to this bar and back motor here, if I tilt, it should at least feel like it's not going crazy. Now, right now you'll notice that it's not doing anything. It's falling again, but it doesn't fall when it's straight up, okay? So that means this quick release plate here needs to move the camera forward and back, okay? So again, we're not close to finishing yet. This is just to get us into a workable state before we start doing micro adjustments. So because it was falling forward, we need to then move this camera back to counter it, okay? So we're just gonna do a really small movement, and this is the one I hate adjusting because it has a tendency to either adjust too much or too little. It's really hard to kind of finite this one, okay? So get yourself as best as it can go, lock it down, and if you hold on to it, you'll notice that now the tilt is no longer falling forward or backwards. Now, if I let go, looks like it's rolling a little bit this way, okay? So that means we need to adjust the motor from the back here just a little bit, okay, not a lot. One thing to note, and it totally depends on the motor that you have and, you know, just the quality in general. These motors are not really meant to just hold specifically. There's kind of a little tension point. So in terms of this, it is going to roll back. It's not actually going to stay where you have it. Even though it's perfectly balanced, it's not really trying to sway one way or the other. You'll notice that it is a little bit slanted this way, and that is just simply how the motor was attached inside. There is just this little point, and basically it's going to be near impossible to actually keep it exactly where it is. But as long as nothing is swinging, then we're pretty good. And especially this one. This is the one that gets people, okay? All right, so in this case, it looks like, hey, everything is good now. Not yet. You actually still have one more motor down here. Now, there are a couple ways that people like to do this, but really I find this way is the fastest, easiest, and it basically gets the job done. So with the tripod legs still in contact with the table, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna start moving it and tilting it like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and you'll notice that it immediately swung and rotated away, okay? So this is the last motor to adjust to get this gimbal in a workable fashion. So we're gonna loosen that up. Now this one's quite easy. So as soon as I tilt and you see it move, as it tilts, I'm just going to make these micro adjustments, and the gimbal is still tilted, and basically I'm just gonna keep pushing until it finally stops and I'm still leaning away, okay? So once that happens, tighten down the nuts, tighten everything down, and you're probably actually very close. If not, you're basically done, okay? So if we tilt, nothing happens. If we do this, it slowly makes its way back to center. That's totally fine. And then the last one is this tilt bar, tilting the camera up and down. And basically, from what I can tell, these are all signs of everything is basically balanced, okay? So at this point in time, simply fire up your gimbal, and there you go. All right. Now, one of the major mistakes that people make is they have this cage completely down and they say, look, it's balanced, okay? That's not really true, because again, if you tilt it up and it swings back down this way, that's not good. And of course, this makes it violently swing back and forth versus the way I did it originally, where it kind of slowly made its way back, okay? So just because it's sitting pretty here, it really does not mean that it's right. You need to make sure you test every motor as best as it can. Okay, so the next gimbal that I'm going to teach you how to balance is the smartphone cell phone gimbal. Now, these gimbals are a lot easier to balance because your phone is flat, there's not a whole lot of moving parts, and in terms of adjustments, you really only have 2 ways to adjust the gimbal. So it's actually not that bad. First things first, let's mount our cell phone. Now, when I mount my cell phone onto this gimbal, one thing that I noticed that I like to make sure I do is if you have any buttons on the side of your cell phone, you want to make sure that they are accessible. You don't want it to be covered up by the mounting point. Okay, so in this case, the first thing we do again is figure out where the main dominant force is coming from. And of course, it's that roll motor again. So because it went down this way, we want to make sure we can push it the other way. So I'm gonna loosen the knob for the roll motor adjustment and simply makes some micro adjustments until it decides to more or less stay centered. Now, depending on the build quality, sometimes with these smaller adjustments, smaller gimbals, when you tighten the knob, it might actually kind of shift something ever so slightly. So just be aware of that. If that's the case, then make sure you have it in the opposite direction so that when you do tighten it down, it does shift to where you need it to be. In this case, I think we should be okay. Nope, you see how it kind of like moved off that way? So that simply means I need to just do a really small adjustment back this way so that when I tighten it down, it's going to move it to where I needed it to be. Now again, remember, it's going to swing back towards the center because the roll motor of how it adjusts in terms of its resting position. Okay, so the last thing is very similar to what we did with the other gimbal was we hold this steady and I flip the cell phone facing straight up and see what happens. If it falls down this way, then what we need to do is we have this weird contraption here. Basically, this can move the cell phone up and down like so. Okay, that's all the way up. And then let me see, make sure you can see it. And that's all the way down, okay? So what we'll do is we'll hold this out, okay? And we'll simply shift the cell phone until it doesn't have that bias anymore, all right? After that's done, lock it down, and it is going to flip a little bit like this, but don't worry about it, it's actually okay. All right, boom, there we go. Now the reason I say that the tilt is okay is because check it out. If it's right here right now, even if I place it, you'll notice that no matter what I do, the motor, again, it automatically will start rolling back. And if I'm here, it shoots forward, okay? But this motion is way too much. So that's why I always prefer to balance it this way so that I know in true form that this motor is technically balanced, even though the motor tension wants to pull it back this way, okay? We don't want this, where we see a really massive movement. Even though it's quote unquote balanced here, it's technically not really. You wanna make sure that it's balanced this way, because you'll notice that when I tilt it, it doesn't really do a whole lot, okay? So what's the bottom line here? The bottom line is you need to practice, practice, and practice. The more you practice, the faster you're really gonna be able to balance these gimbals within a couple minutes. Now, even though if it's just you, and maybe you do work with a team, practice on lenses that might be really heavy, very long, or very short. You kind of want to have a good understanding of what is too much and what is too little, and your ways of fixing these problems. Because let's say you do go onto somebody else's set and you brought your gimbal along because they didn't have one, and they hand you a camera that you haven't actually used, and obviously a lens that you haven't used either. Your ability to immediately know, okay, I just need to do this, this, and that, then you're gonna be able to balance these gimbals much faster, and then that director or whatever is gonna be like, wow, this guy, like, he's really quick. So definitely practice as much as you can. And hey, that's it for this week, everybody. If you have any questions, please leave it down in the comment section below. I will get to them as fast as I can. And hey, if this video has made all the influence in terms of your decision to buy a gimbal or not, I would really appreciate it if you check out my Amazon affiliate links down below. Again, this costs nothing extra to you. It just gives me a little commission so I can continue making videos like this for you. And as always, like and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one.